the garden chat.
Tips from non-experts on gardening.
You're here for getting started. That happened last week. I'm kidding. It's happening right now. And we have the founders of the School of Visual Philosophy. Just to let everyone know, we're going to have a panelist Q&A discussion right after Dana and Yori speak. So for those of you who, so for panelists who are here in the chat right now, once again, thank you so much for being here and checking it out. We'll have you afterwards to discuss things like profits and nonprofits, taxes, business permits, pricing your work, some of the things that we talked about in earlier parts of this session, but we'll go into more detail and give all the creatives a chance to kind of bounce back from each other and provide their own unique perspective. So we have the founders of School of Visual Philosophy, Dana and Yori. Nice to meet you both. Thanks for being here. How is your day going?
Going fabulous.
Yeah, and we're happy to be here.
Thanks for inviting us.
So, let's start from the tip to the top. How did the School of Visual Philosophy get started? It's a lot of words in that.
Yeah.
Long
name.
name.
You want to take this one?
Sure. So I think I dropped out of about 7 or 8 schools, apprenticeships, programs in the process of getting my art education and degree. And not for lack of trying. It was because I was always looking for a utopian educational experience and never really found it. And so I would find the teachers that I connect with, learn as much as I could from them, and then move on if I felt like I wasn't getting as much as I could from the experiences. And eventually met Dana, and we
go out on dates.
We were both teaching at other community colleges or universities, and inevitably our conversation would always go into how to improve systemic educational systems that are in place for art. And having experience trying to change them from within and just finding an incredible amount of roadblocks and red tape. The second beer in would lead to the fantasy of starting our own program where there was no red tape and we could do what we wanted. And enough of that conversation kept coming up that we started to spread the idea. And as soon as we did, everybody we talked to said, well, you should do it. Except for anybody who said, anybody who thought that we should make a living as artists, of course, said, don't do it. It's crazy. It's impossible. But all the artists that we knew and all the students that we had wanted us to. And so one day we just bid it and did it. And we're bootstrappers. We start with whatever we have around us and build upon that until we can get better at whatever it is we're doing.
Yeah, it took us about, I think from the time that we started looking for a building and had some people sign on, because it probably took us about 9 months to finally open, maybe 9 months to a year to open our first location. And yeah, since then we've moved buildings, doubled our space, doubled our renters, and expanded. So it's been a wild ride for sure.
It's a field of dreams experience. If you build it, they will come. We figure if we build the place that we're looking for, then people like us will show up. Right now we have 30 studios, I think.
Yeah.
Roughly that many studio renters. We have a 14,000 square foot building. For those of you who don't know us, we teach a lot of classes, including art, entrepreneurship, blacksmithing, painting, the fundamentals of art theory and that type of stuff. Printmaking, and really try to use art as a vehicle for teaching everything else, really, and a path of thinking.
That's awesome. Congrats. We'll get probably into the nitty gritty of business stuff, but I actually want to ask a little bit about your thoughts on your thoughts on the importance and the appeal of tactile work of, like, you're talking about stuff like blacksmithing and printmaking and other things. What do you think is the appeal, and how do you think that drove the expansion you were talking about?
Well, I mean, I've always been a creator. I've always made stuff with my hands ever since I was a little kid. And I feel like that's just one way that people learn and interact with the world around them. It's not the way everybody does, but there's a connection that happens when you use your hands, and your eyes and your brain. And then when you start to think about what's important to you, what you're passionate about, what your story is, and try to manifest that in something that's made by your own hands. There's a process that you go through, process of failure, a process of success. And it's very rewarding, for one thing, to look at something physical and say, that's a manifestation of who I am, of what I believe, of my journey. And so that's been a really important part of my own journey as an educator and as an artist. And just, as a teacher, to see somebody who hasn't either had any experience with that, or maybe has tried and failed, and then they find that success, the light bulb kind of goes off, or they look at something like, I made that. It's a really special feeling, and what keeps me going as an educator too.
Yeah, I would also add that I feel like the tactile experience is at the base core of relationship building and community, and the establishment of connections between people. And especially for somebody like me, I am a Luddite, for starters. And then when it comes to two-dimensional thought processes, it's not my field, and I struggle with it. I'm in fact dyslexic, and reading is a challenge because of that type of thing. But when it comes into a three-dimensional realm and I can touch it and move it, my brain clicks, and then so do my relationships with people. In fact, COVID's been very difficult because I can't shake people's hands. You only see this much of their face half the time because the masks, and if you're bald like me, you wear a hat all the time. But I really think that the tactile experience is extremely important for community, and that's the basis of how we approach that, I think. Dana does a lot of studying of andragogy versus pedagogy as well, and the different types of learning, and what is three-dimensional spatial learning versus auditory learning. We try very hard to think about these things and incorporate them into how we build our facility.
I mean, it's awesome that you guys kind of recognize that there are different levels of learning, and I think that's something even the institutionalized education systems haven't figured out yet, that there's so many different types. And if you take into account things like you mentioned, dyslexia, or autism, or other things, or just all the approaches people learn and understand the world and things, it's important to have that. So that's awesome. Which leads to my question: at what point as artists do you go, yeah, I can teach somebody this? I can make a curriculum. What kind of?
Day one?
Well, no. So we are very careful about the brand for our school, and because of that, when we bring in teachers, the first thing that I tell them is never teach beyond what you know. And when somebody asks you a question that you don't know what it is, don't bullshit it. Tell them you don't know, and figure it out together. And simply be honest. And it's because I had too many teachers that were afraid not to know what it was they were asked. And I had too many teachers who stopped being students. And as soon as that happens, I think the quality of education they deliver goes down.
But that being said, we're also not afraid to take something. If somebody has an idea of, I really love to learn this, then we, as educators, are also always learning. And so we think it's important to then study those things in addition to how people learn, but the actual topics, so that we can teach them. And the best way to learn something is to teach it, in my opinion. We were talking before in the breakout session about communities, and having that special community that you connect with and you can bounce ideas off of, and not feel afraid to show your true self or fail in front of them, and have that, that sort of support system. And I feel like we've tried really hard to create that at our studio and school, and make it part of the process, so that it's not thought of as a stigma that you're supposed to, as an artist, every piece that you make is supposed to be sellable, or that, that your whole process isn't, that it has to be shown. But I think that it's important to have those places and spaces and people that you can connect with on different levels.
Yeah, in fact, we very strongly think that art is an everyday practice. Some of it belongs in museums and galleries, but not all of it does. It's a language. It's really nothing more than a language. And it's how we use that language that impacts our lives and our communities. And that's how we try to teach, I think.
Are there any installations or projects in recent memory that you guys really kind of are fond of?
I'm fond of my window display that I just finished. I'll just plug that because it's up right now. You can go see it in the windows of the studio on the Alameda. But the reason why I'm super excited about it is it's sort of the manifestation of all that I've been working on with interactivity. And I had started using this conductive paint from Bare Conductive year or two ago, and using it as one component of my prints to increase the dimensionality, but also the interactivity, so that when viewers come up and either touch or are in proximity to one of the sensors, it will trigger lights, or in the case of the window display, it triggers sound. And I think because I believe that art is a language and a tool for communication, that it's just a really further way to interact and communicate with my audience, to get them involved. It's not a static thing, it's a dynamic and interactive thing, which art is in itself. It's just taking it to that level kind of helps introduce people further to that. So I'm super excited about that.
And by the way, she's not very good at plugging herself. She's the Santa Clara Artist Laureate this year, and never tells anybody that.
Congratulations.
For me, I finally have signed contracts and had the first payment for a public sculpture installation, which is going to San Jose State.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, is how to get a public sculpture. Hey.
You want to talk, that might be another topic. Maybe that'll be for the Q&A towards the end. So what's some advice for some folks, because you're talking about expanding, which all these things are awesome, but they require funding. How do you, what is your advice to people who are trying to secure funding for these projects? And it connects a lot to, actually all the past 3 ones that kind of come.
Yeah. You can jump in if you need to, but I don't always make friends when I say this, but art is this, we as a culture view it in a very strange way. There is no other occupation where there are groups set aside to give money to an occupation because they're expected not to make enough on their own. If you are a carpenter and you're not making it, there isn't a place to go get grants for carpenters. And it's the way that our society views artists. We're not expected to make enough on our own. It's expected that we're going to have to find grants and funding. And so from the beginning, I encourage my students to think of it as a trade. And how are you going to, find your own insurance? And how are you going to pay for your taxes? And how are you going to get the jobs that you need to get the next job? And how do you build a career path so that way, as you expand, you have the experience and knowledge and ability? In fact, one of the most common issues I have with even professional artists is they don't always know how to price their own work. And if we as artists don't know what our work is worth, and how do we expect our clients to understand what that is, or our communities and culture? And so it's a very deep systemic problem that we are trying to work with in our school and our programming. So that way, we not only change the way that artists view what they can do as an individual and how they view themselves, but also then transform how our society views them. And so that it can be an occupation where you sit around the table and everybody says, what do you do? And when somebody says, I'm a sculptor, you don't get a look of pity or a strange, oh, whoops, hope your parents aren't aware of that yet kind of thing. And that's something that we really are working hard at in our program. Yes, I'm going to add.
No.
We sometimes don't always agree, which is great. In fact, the only time we really argue is when we go to a museum and talk about art.
That's healthy discourse is what you call that one.
Yeah.
So
I would say, I guess, that it takes the just doing it for one thing. I think part of why we have been successful is because we did decide to say, to weigh the options and say, some people say this is a bad idea and some people say this is a good idea. What are the pros and cons, and how would that impact our lives, and how much can we actually, give to this idea and this endeavor. And if you feel like that's something that you can commit to, then it takes, taking the opportunities that arise, searching for the opportunities, and not being afraid to do it, even though, probably 8 times out of 10, you're going to get a rejection letter. But that just means that the next time that you apply for a grant or search for, a funder that may fit you better, that you're going to be that much more knowledgeable in your practice, and confident in the fact that, I've done this before and I can do it again. And we've definitely had our share of rejections and, no's, but if you can think of that as part of the deal and part of the experience, then you can use that as a motivator, I guess, rather than, because it does sting and it does discourage. Can't lie about that. Even as a business person, it does make you feel like, am I really doing this? Is this really the right path I should be on? But if you take a step back and say, this is really what I want to do, and I am making a difference, even if it's just in my life and the lives of the people around me, then you can keep going.
Really well. Yeah, really well said. Something I'm kind of noticing from you folks, and then Jai as well, is the fact that these, like, you have these, your partner is here, and it kind of helps kind of build pros and cons. Like, it's not as simple as just go do it and try it out. Like, you're actually weighing in the pros and cons, and like, is this going to be good for not me, but also us? And I think that fact that you're kind of thinking of other people outside of this passion project, it's like, how is that valuable to these people? And I think that's great. Which leads to the next question about kind of the transitioning of the school during the pandemic. I know that you guys are still operating and you have some really safe protocols. Can you talk a little bit about that transition process of, we're now a year into it. So like, what was going on a year ago versus now, and how you decided to transition?
Yeah. So the truth is, I think the month before the stay-at-home orders were put in place, Dan and I went out on a date and took a deep breath, and we thought, what, we've been doing this for 5 or 6 years, the School of Visual Philosophy anyway, and we've finally got it figured out. Like, we're paying our bills, everything's good, we've got groceries in the fridge, and it's on the up and up, and all right, we got this. Now it's just going to be fine tuning, and then boom. So that didn't work out, but I think when the stay-at-home orders hit place, like everybody else, we heard it as the shot from a starter pistol, and we immediately went to online programming. And we had been thinking about making interactive video courses anyways, but this was sort of a fire to make sure that we did it. And to give props to the Knight Foundation, we immediately contacted them with an idea, and they very quickly gave us a loan, which got us through a grant, which got us through at least half of the year. To work on interactive video courses. So that's where we went, and we're calling it the Online Atelier.
And that was because we were familiar with their mission and granting, and we knew that they were giving to tech, ideas during the pandemic. So that's why we targeted them. And
yeah, so we taught ourselves 11 different computer programs, and being a Luddite, that's a huge deal for me. And so we film ourselves because of interaction with other people. We weren't really able to. So we closed the shop down every Friday, and we would go in and film classes and then turn them into interactive courses. In some ways, it's been a really good year on that type of development, and we hope that when we get to return to in-person classes, we can continue that as well. In fact, we've had students as far as Australia and England and New Zealand,
Argentina,
which is pretty neat. And then I should also plug, at the very beginning, we were asked to join a task force from District 3 by Raul Perales. And we were part of the creative business.
The arts and culture sector.
Right. And so from that, we came up with something called Safely Social San Jose, which hopefully you guys have been seeing or will start seeing. And it's how creative businesses can get involved to really stimulate the economy in a good way. And right now we have a window display on the Alameda where we were able to pay 10 artists to put their work up into 10 businesses. And we're now driving patrons to those businesses under the Safely Social umbrella, so that way people feel like it's safe and appropriate to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its heart, San Jose is a creative city. It's a go-getter city, a startup culture, and part of what we thought of with Safely Social was that not only the creative businesses are the ones leading the way and thinking of solutions outside the box, putting people to work, but also have a strong role to play in government and in civic life. And so that's kind of how we squeezed our way into that, because again, art is a language. It's just a way that people communicate, and we can communicate on different levels that don't involve speaking the same language. And if we're starting local in our own little districts, and then helping other arts organizations in other districts speak to their own communities, I feel like that's how these things can grow, because we don't have the context to talk to people from other cultures.
Yeah, outside of our community.
Right. But we feel like there are so many, like we said before, San Jose is so diverse and spread out that there's so many different great organizations and pockets and cultures and things that have their own way of communicating that it can't help but be like a great project.
I think the biggest unexpected thing this year is how politically involved we've become. We're very active, and we're also on the founding board of the San Jose Arts Advocates. And so we are way more politically involved than I ever thought that I would be in San Jose. But it's good.
Yeah.
I think creative voices need to be there.
Like 2020 really brought a lot of people into the more political sphere of we should probably have a say in
Attention, yeah.
This is it's a really contentious time.
Yeah,
I know about the socially BSSSJ.
Safely Social San Jose. Yeah, it's a mouthful. We like to make things that are a mouthful. Visual philosophy.
So you talk a little bit about organizing and things. What are some of the tools and resources you use to keep the school going? I know you mentioned you're a Luddite, so I'm not sure if you're using an abacus or whatever.
Yes. Networks are huge. We talked about this in our breakout session too. I mean, having a community where you're not the only one having to do or know everything, I feel like that's the best part of being in a group, having a studio with another, with a bunch of people, or being in an organization like Gen Arts or the San Jose Arts Advocates. When you can find your group that you click with, then having letting go and having other people use their strengths is really important. I think as founders of an organization, sometimes I feel like I need to be the one who does everything. But definitely this year has taught me that I can't do everything, and it's important to find people who you can say, turn something over to and say, run with this. This is your wheelhouse. You can have free reign of this because it's something that you do well, and I'm going to do what I do well. That as a business person is tough, but necessary,
Yeah, to keep the community going, we have monthly meetings within our renters, and we've also learned to say yes and to say thank you, which was not an easy thing. Like Dan was talking about, when you have this baby of an idea and you watch it grow, it's hard to let it expand. But then realizing the community is bigger than us, and when people want to offer help, if it's good help, say yes. And that was a hard thing to actually learn. And I say thank you because oftentimes I'd feel guilty and I wouldn't have finances to pay them and they wouldn't really want it. They just wanted to help. And so saying thank you was enough. And so it's actually really, really amazing. And the fact that we have an amazing community that continues to support and help and be involved. And really all they want is a thank you at the end of the day. So we say yes.
Yes, and thank you. Kind of like a improv, the yes anding.
Yeah, yes.
What is some advice that you have for potential students and the folks who are on this this chat who want to become just professionals, not even in this, just like, you know, to identify as a sculptor, as a printmaker and all those things? Like, what's some advice to those people?
So if we have about 6 more hours, one of the things that I'm asked the most, or have been asked the most as an art teacher, is I get parents that come to me desperate because their child wants to go and study art and they want me to talk their kid out of it. And they're hoping that if they go to an artist, you know, they're going to say, oh God, don't go down this way. And essentially I tell them, what if your kid comes to you and says, you know what, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to own my own business. I understand the difficulties involved in that. But the thing that I want to do is going to allow me to do what I love and impact my community in a positive way and make a living at it. And I kind of start to get the parents' attention, and then they start saying, well, what program is that? And I said, well, it should be the art program you're sending your kid to. You know, and then it opens up the dialogue, and before they know it, they're interested in the idea that their kid could become an artist because they never thought that it could be a business. So I would say that. I would also say to find a lens through which you view the world. So for me, it's as a sculptor. So no matter what it is I'm doing, I view the world through that lens. And it helps me to solidify and identify the language and the dialect within it that I am able to communicate with and understand. And then to all students, you will never get a better education than what you put into it yourself. So regardless of who your teachers are and what your experiences are, if you're not committed, you won't get anything. And then, like I said, if I got 6 hours, there's always an and then in this. The other thing that I don't see enough is students pushing their teachers and expecting their teachers to be on top of their game and professionals. I think it's too easy for a teacher to half-ass their programming and to not treat it that every class depends. Every class helps change what their students are going to be able to do. And I think that it's an extremely big responsibility that's not often taken seriously enough. So demand that your teachers show up on time and are there to take you seriously.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've come to realize through my own education and as a teacher is that you have to, well, number one, you're probably not going to find the utopian ideal that you might be looking for, searching for, but if you don't pursue it and you don't try to find the path that you need, regardless of what people tell you should, or you know, that the schools tell you should. I feel like in school it's mostly a passive activity, and learning is really not passive at all. Like, it's a really active activity. And if you stop and think about it, I mean, watching kids, they're learning from day one. And if you can come to terms with the fact that you're always learning and everything is an opportunity, but you have to be involved, I think then no matter what you do, you know, you're a student and a teacher. And that's something that I try to help people understand, is that, you know, you're always learning, but you have to take the responsibility and you have to own that path.
Yeah, well said. Anything you both want to plug, or any final statements you want to say as you wrap up you as the last panelist of the day, besides the Q&A at the end?
I would say if you, just because we're on this topic, if you are taking a class, like say you're in this workshop and you think that there's something really great about it, or you respond to something, then make sure that you tell the hosts or tell the organization that this really helped, or this aspect, because the more specific you can be, especially as a teacher and a person who runs an institution, if you're not a mind reader, and if people don't tell you, I got a lot out of this part, or this part didn't really work for me, or it would be great if you had, this, then the feedback is really important in order to grow. And as a teacher, I try not to take things personally that way. If somebody says, I wish you'd have done it this way, or maybe you could add this, or I really didn't get a lot out of that. Then it helps, because again, like in your practice, when you make mistakes, or you fail, or you find that you're not reaching somebody that you can be reaching, then having that knowledge will help you in the next project. But if you don't hear it, then you don't know. As a business owner too, I think we've had to learn that too.
Yeah, and then I would plug, we are in the development of a program called the Dialects of Art. And we keep saying that art is simply a language. And I used to say that art is the most universal of languages. And although I still believe that, I also recognize that there are many cultures who speak it very differently. And there are many dialects within all of these different situations. And so we are teaming up with a storyteller who is helping us. The three of us are working together to develop grammar, essentially, for art, and how to use art as a language for communication. And then being very careful to take into account these different dialects within different cultures and heritage arts, and how they use their structure and how they use their symbols and their colors, so that we can develop a fun and comprehensive program that provides an avenue for all of these methods of communication to come out through art, and hopefully opens up a situation of study
and empathy
in these. And so that we think that the better cultures communicate through art with each other and outside of their culture as well, the more empathy and understanding we have, the better our world will be.
I think we'll leave it at that. Yori, thank you so much for being part of this. Thank you to all the panelists who've been part of this. We are now going to transition into the Q&A. We're going to ask a couple of questions, and after that, we're going to transition right to the after party, where everyone who's attending can kind of ask some more questions. We might just kind of transition from, it might be easier just to kind of go with the questions that I'll ask, and then we'll just transition right into questions for everyone else, so that way we can get that going. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be taxes for profits, for-profits, and nonprofits. And I asked some of the panelists a few weeks ago, just to kind of prep for these kind of conversations. What we're going to really talk about is some of just like you can either talk about like what your tax season looks like, what are some of the basic things that you should know the basic tools and things you should know when filing taxes as a creative, whether it's for your for-profit or nonprofit. And we're going to go in order of the speakers. So first Alyssa Ray, and then Jai, if she's available, and then Carmen, as well as Dana and Yori. So that way, spaces out that way. They don't have to do so much talking after finishing up this really great panel discussion. So Alyssa Ray, for you, what does your tax season look like? What are some of the basic things that you do, and what are some things that you think everyone should know about that you've learned?
I've been doing my own taxes since I've had to pay my taxes, but by that I just use TurboTax. And I recently learned that there's some free website that you can use, so I'm going to look into that. But my best tip would just be keep your receipts. Something I'm super afraid of is being audited. It sounds terrifying. But keep your receipts, whether it's just in a folder that you file away, or like just a stack you have somewhere. And then I have like a Google sheet of every project I've done, and whether I got paid for it or if I didn't. So that way, when it's time to go over like what I made, I didn't lose track of any events or anything that I did. This past year, I forgot to report the advance that I got for writing my book. And I realized it like the day after I submitted my taxes, and now I'm just kind of waiting. I have like 3 years to send an amendment, and so now I'm just kind of waiting on that. I'm just kind of probably putting it off when I shouldn't, but I'm small and I'm kind of hoping that they will just turn away from me. But keep track of that stuff because, you know, it could come back.
I'm not sure if Jai is on the chat, but if not, we can go over to Carmen to talk about the nonprofit world and like what those taxes look like.
If you are a nonprofit, taxes are extremely important. You essentially become a nonprofit by applying to the IRS to receive a tax exempt status. It's also, it's all public information as well, so you can look up a 990 for a nonprofit organization, and you can see all of their income and expenses, including like, my salary is public information. And to work with an advisor, on this like higher scale as a nonprofit is extremely important. But even if you are, an individual sole proprietor, I still think that working with an accountant is very helpful. Keep your receipts. It's also helpful if you can, put some chronological order to those, because if you are in an audit, it's really just to look back through your filings and provide some like proof of documentation of like, okay, well, you wrote this check or you received this check and you put it in this account. So like, let's see the paper trail of all those actions. And see what other tools. Yeah, Google Sheets, Analog, it's all really helpful. And I think for nonprofits too, I think it adds like some trust and transparency. We're going to be doing for Local Color, we're going to be doing a voluntary audit. And I've sat in on a couple of other ones before, and it just turns into this giant binder. So it seems scary. Penalties are scary, but if you just do the process, it's not that bad.
All right, Dana and Yori.
Yeah, we have both actually. We started as an LLC because we had a bunch of tools and equipment that we wanted to keep to ourselves and not give over to the nonprofit, because when you are a nonprofit and you have equipment, if you ever sell or dissolve the nonprofit, it has to go to another nonprofit. And so the nonprofit that we started 2015 actually licenses space and equipment from the LLC. So again, yes, like everybody said, keep good records, keeping like agreements, even if it's just all between us, like because we're two separate businesses, we have to make sure that we write agreements and contracts and things to keep everything legal and above board. But I also like using Airtable or some kind of database, Google Sheets or Excel, to keep track of like what Alyssa Ray said, all of your projects, because we have so many things going on. We had to get people donating things, money and equipment to the nonprofit. And then we also have fundraisers and keeping track of where all the income is coming from. The revenue is important. And if you can do it on a monthly basis, so that's even easier. But yes, QuickBooks and TurboTax help. We have a payroll, that if you can make it streamlined and simple as possible, because we can't afford to pay an accountant. So we try to do it as much as we can ourselves, and use the technology available to us that we can.
I would add two things too. One, not to scare people, but I think there are something like 1,400 agencies that small businesses are
that are kind of governing.
That can govern small businesses. And that's when I say that there are so many rules and regulations out there that it's impossible to know all of them. And so we still get letters coming in saying, well, why didn't you do this? And I didn't even know it was a thing. You know, and who are you? And is this a scam? Oh no, it's a real deal. And you just got to do the best that you can, because that's a reality of the game to be played. And then the other thing for individuals out there listening, so if you're not necessarily a business larger than yourself, be careful how you set yourself up, because there are I think there are 8 levels of intent that will separate you over from being a hobbyist to a professional. And if you can fulfill, I think 5 of those 8, don't quote me on this, but it's something like that, then you can start writing your taxes off. For example, one of them is the intent to make profit. You don't actually have to succeed, but you have to prove that you're trying. And if you're just painting and you're not trying to make a profit off of it, for example, then you really shouldn't be writing your paints off as an expense. So keep that in mind. So it's a little bit different for an individual than it is for a larger business. But just do the best you can, because you're going to get that letter someday that says, why didn't you file this?
Can I add too for sole proprietors? So what Jaya was saying that, like, I mean, at least on the payout, it's like any payouts over $600 kind of triggers something, especially with California. We have to be aware of like AB5 and when someone's an individual subcontractor and when they should actually be considered an employee. But if you are someone who's receiving 1099s and you are a gig worker, typically, when you're filing, when you get a new job and you fill out your W-2, you ask for some amount of your payment to be withheld for state and federal taxes. When you receive a 1099, typically that doesn't happen. So I do highly suggest that you save aside like at least 20% of every check that you get, so that you can use that to pay anything that you may owe in taxes on the following year.
It's a very good point.
Really great point. So great I had to write it down. So in the chat, I'm putting some of the advice and tips in the chat. Feel free to copy and paste it and use it how you like. All right, we're going to go into making it legal, because we're already connected to this business permitting, which is another part of the red tape of running a business. We'll start in the same order, with Alyssa Ray being someone who does pop-ups and does a lot of kind of vendor events and things like that. What are some of the basic permitting things that are important for an artist? Are there any permits that exist or that you need to know about if you're doing online shops and doing things like book sales? For Carmen, same kind of question, but as far as like, what are the basic permits for project management or for nonprofit? And then with Dana and Yori, it's kind of a combination of all of those things, because they both exist in that, LLC and nonprofit. So we'll start with Alyssa Ray.
Yeah, when whatever city you're in, and I'm assuming you're all operating somewhere in the Bay Area, just make sure you have the permit to sell. Like if you're selling individual objects, I can't remember if it's by county or by city, but though just look up like a seller's permit, and make sure there's some where like the seller's permit lasts for a month or 3 months, and so when I first started, I was just doing like summer markets. So I just did 3 months. And like slight loophole, some places like don't check if you're being up to date. So it's on you to have morals and be up to date and not get in trouble. Some like you can give the old permit number to let's say like SJ Made, and they'll be like, okay, she has permit number, great, sell, you can sell. But like for your own self and business reasons, like just make sure you're keeping that updated. And if you have a website, taxes are different when you're selling product, depending on the state. So like even though I'm in California, if somebody in Portland buys my book, they don't pay sales tax. And sometimes you have to set that up on your website. It depends on what platform you're working with. But before you set that, while you're setting your website up, just keep that in mind. Sometimes you have to like turn it on or off depending on your platform. And then it just varies across states.
To be a legitimate 501c3, well, the basic structure is that you're upheld to charitable law, and you need to apply with the IRS to be a non-exempt status, and you have to have a board. That's like the very general understanding of it. I learned a lot of this, and I'm still learning this process, again, through the Center of Cultural Innovation. They taught like a really great class just about entities, like all the way from like B Corps to being a sole proprietor, LLC. And so I'm still like learning all the differences, and that's why it's great to like on the legal lens to work with legal counsel. I've been, this sounds so random, but I've been meaning to hit up a lawyer just to learn. It's Her Place is In. They're like based in the East Bay, but they look like they're working with this like really awesome kind of millennial lawyer that's like giving some more understanding about like copyright, which is another thing, you know, understanding what a VARA wager is in the mural field has been really important. So yeah, just like looking for that assistance. And then also insurance. As a nonprofit and as a individual, you know, if you're working out on a sidewalk, or if you're an art handler or something like that, insurance is something that we don't always think about, but it is definitely important, just to the liability coverage for that.
Thanks, Carmen.
We have the joys of being our own individual artists, selling our own work, owning an LLC, and running a nonprofit.
Yeah, the interesting thing about a nonprofit is that people don't really own it. It's sort of its own thing, and you work for it. So even though we started it and we run it, we're not really the quote unquote owners like we are of the LLC. But that being said, you still have to be, because you are an entity, you still have to get a business license with the city to operate at your place of business. And we do have a brick and mortar location, and for the nonprofit and for the LLC as well. And I mean, permits, it was interesting because we had trying to find a building at first, getting a permit with the city, but trying to figure out the zoning, like in order to, if we could be at a building, and like, do you get the permit first and then try to find the building, or do you find the zoning and then, yeah, it's like a very, and nobody at the city like tells you anything. They're like, well, why haven't you filled out this piece of paper? I'm like, do I have to? I don't know. So it was a lot of trial and error, kind of winging it on that regard. But as far as the legality, we started both of our businesses through LegalZoom.com, and they're our registered agent, which they give you updates. So they fill out your paperwork. You still have to apply to be a nonprofit and do all that application yourself, like Carmen said, with the IRS. But then once you have that, they kind of remind you of your filing dates and due dates and things, but you still have to do all the filing with the Attorney General and the charitable, whatever it's called, the charitable institutions. I don't know. There's like 5 different things. But yeah, I mean,
who was that woman that came into the studio?
That was from the CFTA, CTFA. They were really nice. They're formerly the BOE, the Board of Equalization, is now the California Tax and Fee Administration, I think it's called. But that's if you're going to get a seller's permit, and like Alyssa Ray was saying, sell goods, you know,
As
at a
far
location.
as scary as it is to call government agencies and talk about taxes, because you always, if you're like me, you're afraid they're going to find out something you didn't know and charge you for it. They were actually a really good organization that just were there to help you be on the up and up and give you information. So this one was coming around to make sure that the artists in the space knew what they even should be looking at. So I would recommend contacting them. They're very open about helping out. And simple things like, you don't need a DBA if you're using your name, but if you're not, then you do, and stuff like that, and how to even think about getting permits and what taxes you're up for and that type.
Yeah, and if you are a studio, if you're renting a studio, because we host artists in our space and they have their own little private area like local color, we suggest that we have umbrella insurance for things that happen with our equipment, but you know, we're not responsible for the loss of, you know, something happens to their own work in their studio. So we recommend that they get renter's insurance, and sometimes their insurance companies will help them get that. It's not very expensive. But if you're thinking about having a space, even if you're just working in the space and not selling out of it, then having that extra insurance, you know, as like an extension of your house for your workplace is really important.
I'm not gonna lie, if you want a brick and mortar place, be ready to be mad every time you walk into the city. It is really hard with the permit process, but persevere if you want it.
Awesome. I do want to bring it up again. I'm not sure how common it is, but insuring your hands, I keep hearing that as a thing that people parts of their bodies. I imagine it's more important if you're working like in something like blacksmithing, where you could, or anything where there's a chance of hurting a hand or a finger. I started getting a little bit of carpal tunnel early on, and it made me have like an existential crisis of like, what do I do if I can't use my typing phalanges? So we're going to go into pricing work, and I think we've talked about this in each session, the importance of pricing your work, how you kind of came up, if you have a formula, how did you come up with it? And if you are somebody who holds space for others, or you are kind of playing a role of an educator or someone who kind of guides young professional artists, how do you help them price their work as well? And so we'll start with Alyssa Ray, who talked about it earlier, but she can reiterate it again for those who might have missed it.
Trin asked me a really important question on the chat, was if I factor in my time on top of supplies. And yes, I do, and you should as well. I kind of used a weird formula of like, I took the hourly rate I was making at my day job and used that as a base to work up from, just because I felt like, okay, I agree that my time is worth this much an hour, so I'll kind of build on top of that. It's not the best, but it's a good place to start. And then for other folks, when I started like consignment with my products back in the day, typically consignment's a 50-50 split. And when you are making your product, you're making like nothing. I remember I was trying to sell plant hangers, but with the cost of the material and me trying to pay myself for my time, I had to price these plant hangers at like $50. And when there's Walmart and Target and Amazon, nobody's going to buy a plant hanger for $50 when they could buy it for $10. And the people who are buying the plant hangers for $50, they more so believe in you and not the plant hanger themselves. But when I moved to Portland, I went to a yarn shop and asked to sell my goods there. And the owner of the yarn shop, she said, okay, we do a 60-40 split. And I thought, wait, why? You have a business store? And she goes, yeah, but I want to help you out as the artist. So moving forward, whenever I had my pop-ups, whether in Portland or downtown, I kind of took that along with me, and always tried to implement that 60-40, just because as an artist, I know how much supplies are, I know what your time is worth. And I just wanted to like pay that forward. That's not always going to be the case. But I wanted to help when I could. And then I also would just do trades. Like my cousin helped work my pop-up. So I told her, okay, you work my pop-up and you work my pop-up on Sundays, you can keep the profits aside from like the processing fee. Like, then that's kind of like you're up, and just like little things like that. that's always super helpful.
Kind of looking at this question in like multiple lenses. This came up in our breakup session too, but to get my like foot in the door, I worked for free. I worked 2 internships. My second internship, I was like, I'll just keep working for free, but like let me keep my desk here. And eventually, I was able to get a job there just because I was there when like turnover had happened. Um, but that's not something I advocate for. I feel like even if it's an internship, a flat base stipend or something, is worthwhile. And whenever I'm in that position of building a budget, I definitely put in there in that better best good better best scenario, for higher compensation. Like even if it's like a youth program, like the conversation of compensating students for participating in a program that's like really a service, but just realizing that we all like live in this capitalist system, so we need to be able to support ourselves in that way, to support our livelihood in that way. And then I'll drop it in the chat. This group started as a fiscally sponsored project at Southern Exposure, and created this fee calculator. And it's based off of the overall org budget size. And so, if you're going to work with someone, just look up their 990. You can see what their organizational budget is, and kind of using this calculator, you can say, well, if you want me to be a presenter, or I need like $150, or just make sure that you're paying yourself a living wage. Because again, if we can have that kind of like barter in kind, that's great, and that happens in like specific moments. But again, we're living in this capitalist system, and we need to pay rent. Our landlord's not going to barter with us. So you need to make sure that whoever you're working with understands that. And if you are an arts administrator, at appropriate times, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and ask for that transparency too with the people that you're working with, if you're working at an organization.
You want to start?
No, you go ahead.
I come from a background of craftsmen, so I would probably be a 4th generation carpenter, but I fell in love with sculpture and didn't pursue that. But I still pursue my artistic career the same as a tradesperson. And so I price my work based on time and material, and then I add an artistic percentage based on where I'm at in my career. So as a student, I paid myself student wages just as I would, if I were to go get a job on a job site as a carpenter, as an 18-year-old, they're not going to pay you more than $20 an hour probably. And so I figured I should always maintain at least that. And then currently, for example, in full transparency, if I'm not charging $100 an hour for my time, then I should be doing something else. So I charge $100 an hour plus materials, and then add in a percentage, which can vary a little bit, and it's based on the project and how much intellectual time, in other words, time that's not really easily manifested in terms of on the clock manifestation, I plug into it as well. So that's how I charge my time, and I encourage my students to do something similar, because at the end of the day, I feel like I've got a solid formula that I can stand behind, and I've even explained it to some clients, and as soon as I do, then they're okay with it. So that's how I price my work.
Yeah, and on that note, I would say after taking the Business of Art workshop course, I have started keeping a time clock of my hours at different jobs, because I have the LLC job, the nonprofit job, my art job, and then other little side projects. And it's very eye-opening to see the time that you actually spend on these projects, even if it's research or writing grants for your, art, career, it's important to make sure that you understand all the time that you do spend on your artwork.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what I said, compounded on what Danny's saying too, is when I advise my students, I also warn them to be very careful of the difference between what they should be able to clock in as billable hours versus what they're doing to learn how to do something, because I don't think that they should expect their clients to pay for that. And one of the reasons why I charge $100 an hour, that's what my mechanic is going to charge me. And also when I clock that in, I am fully confident that I am producing quality, consistent work, when that punch clock goes on, basically. And it's not a time where I'm trying to figure things out.
I want to add on to that. Totally 100% agree. Sometimes people will come to me with an idea that's related to fiber arts, but not necessarily something I can do with my eyes closed, like my other stuff. And so that's when I implement, like, okay, I'm learning this with you, so it's either a lower rate or for sure let's just barter something or barter your skills or something like that. Yeah, I love that.
Awesome. Well said. Next question is, we're going to kind of like wrap up the last two questions because they work really well together. And it's about steps to take for your business to grow, and kind of like what kind of business literacy, actually, we'll probably keep it as one. Steps to make your business grow, I think, is like what we'll discuss. And we talked a little bit about each person of like, how you started out as kind of like more of a DIY thing to a kind of like the intro to small business when you start kind of making the kind of financial thing. But what are like let's put it down to like 3 or 4 steps of like, what 4 points do you think helped your 4 steps that helped your business grow or continue to grow right now? Hope that makes sense. If not, I can clarify.
Well, this is that I'll let you know when I figure it out. I will say, when you're jumping into a creative career, an artistic career, and it's going to happen over time, you'll develop this over time, but have that idea of what you actually want to do. I jumped into this thinking, okay, I want to knit and stuff, and it turned into crochet and weaving and macrame and workshops. And then there are often times when people would pitch an idea to me, and it was kind of in my realm, and I would be like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I can do that. I'll do it. And then in the process of doing it, realize I don't actually like doing this, but this person already gave me the money and now I have to finish the project out. So just be sure of what you want to do. So when you market yourself, then you know that you're getting the business you want. So sometimes I'll take on a project where I might need to do the project for funds or whatever, but I'm not going to post about it because I don't want people to think that, oh, this is something that they do, so I can go to them for it. Just market yourself for the work that you want. Kind of like the whole, you attract the energy that you're giving out, that, but with your art. Yeah.
I would say, okay, so this is not in any particular order, I suppose. I maybe chronological would be helpful, but when I was like 19, I got tattooed on my shoulder of mice and men. And I think understanding that plans change was really important for me, because like I a plan went wrong and I totally spiraled for a moment, but it's going to keep happening and you don't have to spiral too off track. It just means that you just have to walk around it and take a different path. And finding people that will support you through those hard times, be there with you to celebrate, because that's really what like fuels you to want to keep going. And make sure you're doing something that you want to do. I've had, I think, like 7 or 8 jobs now. I was a sports fan photographer at the Shark Tank for one day and I did not return because I was like, this is not how I want to use a camera. Like I will never use this skill and knowledge again. But learning skills and doing new things and like just being uncomfortable for a little bit, like that's the fun part. And everything else, like sustaining yourself, should come second to you, or should just come along with you doing something that brings you joy and can bring other people joy too, to want to support you.
You start.
It took me a while I always knew that I wanted to be an artist and an educator, but to really know and be able to comfortably talk about what I was making and why I was making it took a while. It took going to college and then grad school and starting a business. And then finally winning a big award to be like, hey, I kind of got something going. I think I can finally talk about why I'm doing this. But I think that if you can at least write a rough draft of why you're doing something and your story and what is important to you, like everybody said, then at least you'll have a direction. And yes, it might go like this or like this, but you'll rewrite your artist statement and your bio probably 20 to 100 times. But you got to start somewhere, and fear of making it perfect is probably one of the worst things that artists do to themselves, stumps them. So wherever you're at, just accept that that's where you're at and start from there. That's what I would say.
I think it starts with education, practice, and commitment bundled into one thing. So you're learning what you want to do, and you put the time and effort in to be able to do that thing, and you keep at it and you keep at it. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of, it's the first thing that eliminates students from becoming professionals, is the commitment and practice that it takes to transfer into a professional realm. And then I think choosing a lens, I mentioned that before, through which you view your practice. And that leads into the next thing, which would be to own your business enough so that you can brand it. If somebody asks you what is your business, you're an artist, what do you do? And if you can't respond to that and give them your brand and give them your image and your story, you haven't figured it out. So if you can't tell yourself what that is, I would look deep and figure that out. So I think giving yourself a brand, I think, is actually a really good practice, because that's, as a small business entrepreneur, as an artist, essentially, you are the brand. I mean, let's face it. And again, I don't make a lot of friends when I talk about, fine art and business in the way that I do, but that's how I practice, and that's how I want to make a living as an artist. And so, yeah, when I sell a sculpture, it's a Yori Seeger sculpture. That's the brand kind of thing. And then the final thing for me is the love of it. I am of the school of thought that I will never really master anything, because I'm hoping that I'll always be able to learn more at it. And if that's the case, if I'm in my 80s and I'm still learning how to do sculpture better, then I'm doing it well. And if I can look back at the previous decade and think, wow, I thought that was good. What was I thinking? But at the time, really did think it was good. That's awesome, because that means that I've improved from that, or changed. Improvement may be the wrong word, but changed. Because I think when we're using art as a language, the evolution of self is vital to keep things alive. So those would be the 4 things that I would push for.
Awesome. So this is the last panel question. I was going to try to lump it all together, but I realized it would be a mess, so I decided not to. We're going to talk about from things like from Grammarly to LinkedIn to networking parties. What are just the kind of things every professional should have in their arsenal and belt? They don't have to be those things that I mentioned. Just for you, like, what are the things that you use on a day-to-day basis, or even on a weekly basis where you go, yeah, this kind of like, these are the, without these tools, I would not be as successful as I am right now. I'll start with Alyssa. Ray.
That's funny. I do use Grammarly for my work emails. Of my planner. There, even on the days I ignore my planner, like meaning I wrote all this stuff that that I like have planned out that I'm going to do, and then just definitely did not do any of those. My planner, that's just a tool that I use all day, every day, even when I don't want to. And I hate to say my phone, but there's so many things to do on your phone, from marketing to emails, that it's impossible not to use it. As an artist, I always want to be offline, but as we've all mentioned, at one point you kind of have to be online. But I guess my phone and my planner are my things I use the most consistently.
Grammarly is also my best friend. I've probably been using it for like maybe 2 years or more than that. But it's just really helpful to like show up without typos, and you know, every communication is really important, and you are making some impressions, and that kind of professional guise, not everyone understands it the same way. Some people are more traditional in what professional means, and Grammarly helps you in that category. YouTube University, it's real. You can learn so much. I've learned how to change a fluorescent light bulb to how to use Salesforce CRM on YouTube, and like things like bill.com, or just whatever you want to learn. Like, someone's probably teaching it for free on YouTube. It's amazing. And then books, you know, support our public libraries. It takes me a long time to like read a book. It might take me like three months or something, but it's there. I can pick it up, and you know, with every chapter, I'm learning something from it. I also think, you know, and this is something where, like, for me personally, public speaking, I guess because I've put myself in these situations often enough, I've becoming more comfortable with it. But I think it is like a really important tool, you know, even like what Jai was saying, like the ability to like talk to strangers and just like tell someone who you are, not from like just to share, you know, and like a casual and make connections. I would say too, my phone is a great tool. I have a Google Pixel, and I can just like be on sheets on my computer, and then, you know, take that document and like have my Instagram post already ready. And that's kind of helpful, but then it's like, it's hard to plug out of work sometime in that regard. So be careful. If you could have 2 phones, you know, that's a good option to look at. And Canva, which I see a lot more utilization of. That's one of my favorites, and it's free. You know, you can try to loop you in with the premium stuff. But yeah, Canva is a great option there.
I cannot live or do business without Canva. Yes, I'm there with you. Canva is amazing. We use MailChimp. I mentioned Airtable before as like a database to organize all of our projects. And you can also rope in your other people if you have, you know, either employees or board members, or even just you know, your group who you want to run by things. You can share those things with them. Like Alyssa Ray said, I have a sketchbook. It's sort of like a planner slash idea slash, sometimes I write things down and don't look at them, but it's there and I wrote it out. And so it makes me process like the hand brain thing. And because I'm so visual, I got some different colored pens that I can like color coordinate and bring things out and make them very easy to go back and reference, which has become helpful. I had one other thing, but what about you?
I'm the opposite of everybody. I am.
Oh, a filing cabinet,
Hmm.
an old school filing cabinet, because you save your receipts, you save all your, somebody donated this, I donated to them, I did this, I did filing cabinet.
I'm like a pencil and a handshake. So in-person networking is where I thrive the most. And in fact, most of my personal work is through word of mouth contact. But then even with the nonprofit and the LLC, it's the in-person networking that helps me put things in place and get things done.
All right, and I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for.
Wait. I wanted to add. While we're all like naming a lot of the same apps, and you might think like, oh yeah, I already use Gmail, I don't need to learn how to use Gmail. Make sure you're using your apps to their fullest potential. On Gmail, there's a setting where you can remind yourself about an email that you opened up 3 days ago, or an email that's waiting for a response. I highly recommend that. I always forget about emails, whether it's work or business or personal. I'm like, oh yeah, there's that email. So you can set it up to where Gmail's like, hey, do you remember this from 3 days ago? Do you want to check this out again? It's super helpful. So just make sure you're using everything to its fullest potential.
To add to that, Gmail also has a really cool template feature where if you have to send out mass messages to people, you can just like save and draft all these templates just to make sure you don't have to like copy and paste from a draft and do all of that. So that's like a really important thing as well.
One last quick one for Gmail. I also learned you can schedule to send emails. So if you're like a night owl and you're like, I just had typed this perfect message at 2 a.m., but I don't want to send this at 2 a.m. because that could be weird. You can schedule it for like 8 a.m. and then someone just thinks you're like the super productive early morning person. So yeah, Gmail, G Suites in total, I feel like all of their like help bubble things are actually like really straightforward, but you can also like go on YouTube too for like a more visual learning. But yeah, Gmail, it's a good tool. It's a good tool.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for being here for this. We're right on time, so thank you for the final comments and statements. So at this point, we're going to have a bit of an after party setup where it's basically going to be, I'm going to stop talking, and everyone here can ask questions to various members of the panel, like the different panelists, and it's going to be kind of like a loose form thing, but I will ask that people kind of utilize the chat to say if they want to speak next or they have a question or anything, and then we can keep track of it that way. And yeah, does anyone want to start with any questions they may have? I can always call on somebody. Make you nervous, I don't know.
I have a question. Okay, so this is for Dana and Yori. Since you guys talked about looking for a space and zoning and all the things that come along with it, I was just kind of curious if you could elaborate more on what goes into a search for a space.
Absolutely. Because we knew we wanted to work with, number one, like heavy machinery, because we did blacksmithing and bronze casting. We knew that we probably would fit in like an industrial zone.
What she's trying to say is, number one, you have to find the zone in the city planning that fits what you want to do, because
if you're just going to be retail, then you want to make sure that you get into the, like the retail zone. You don't want to be out in like the auto repair shop areas.
Or you won't be able to, because you can't get retail spaces and non-retail zone spaces.
But the tricky part with us was that we also had so many things happening. Like we wanted to have the artist studio spaces, and we wanted to have like a gallery space. So in our business plan, I would say, number one, you should write out what you exactly plan to do, if it's just selling or if it's going to be a combination of teaching and selling, because that will help when you give your plan to the planning people. They're like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand where you might fit in. And it is a little bit fluid, and you can kind of work your way into where you kind of want to be, which is what we ultimately ended up doing with our current location, which is in a commercial retail zone. But commercial was the key because it had a warehouse in the back that was zoned as light, I think it was light industrial.
Which allows us to do the blasting in the back, but yet still have all of the other things that we want to do in the front of the building. We were basically that square peg, and the guy was trying to put us in the square hole, but there wasn't one, and they didn't know what to do with that kind of thing. So number one, definitely zoning is the biggest. Number two, be prepared to have them tell you a bunch of different things, because the truth is the person at the counter giving you advice is not responsible for the advice that they give you at the end of the day. Even if you follow it to a letter and you go back and you can show them a video camera of them saying that to you, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's who stamps your permits that has the final say. Number three, be very prepared to spend way more money than you think you should. It is ridiculous. It's astronomical. In fact, we were being charged for things that happened in the building in the 1960s, which I didn't really think was very fair. And I'm pretty easygoing, but I had to tell the person that I was going to walk across the room, take a deep breath, and then walk back, because if I didn't, I was going to say something that wasn't appropriate. And then it's a huge chicken and egg thing, and it's really difficult. And so if you're actually looking, I advise you to shoot us an email, and we can give you the advice that we've been through, because it's a huge challenge. It's really hard.
Yeah, because you find a building or a location that you might like, but then, or do you have the business plan first and then try to fit into the the building? And
well, not only that, then negotiations with lease terms are a whole other issue, and you have to have the address and start talking to the landlord before you can get the permits from the city. But then if you get the permits, but then you don't get the place because it falls through, et cetera, et cetera. It's and of course, San Jose is one of the most expensive cities in the States, which doesn't help matters. But then also, unfortunately, there are a lot of vacancies right now due to COVID, and I have no idea what that's going to look like tomorrow.
so it's not, with most things, it's not out of the realm of possibility to negotiate, and you should just ask, like we were talking about, or somebody mentioned before, like, don't be afraid to say, would you do a 60-40 split? Would you go down, $1 in the rent? Would you do, what they can just say, nah, ask.
Even at the city level. So when you're talking to somebody at the counter and they tell you that you have to owe, X amount of a fee, ask them to lower it, because you never know. And people don't think that they can do that. But, your city planner is there for you as well. Contact your city planner and say, hey, I'm trying to get this done. I have no idea where to start. And just go into the city building and get as much information from as many people as you can before you commit to anything.
That's true.
Right. Thank you. That was all really helpful. I appreciate it.
And good luck.
Yeah. City needs more art businesses.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions that people had?
If not, I'm going to do a quick plug for Safely Social. If you go to safelysocialsj.com, you'll find out the events that they're doing. And I think as many arts creative people we can get involved with the program, the better.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have one more question, just for it can be for anybody, but with the pandemic it looks like people are transitioning to like things opening up again. People are getting vaccinated. I actually got my Moderna vaccination a couple days ago. So what do you think the post-COVID or not even post-COVID, just kind of the new world that we're going into, what's that going to look like for your businesses or businesses in general? Like, have you guys thought about that? Are you just kind of like, we'll see what happens and not really think too much about it? I just want to know your thoughts. And that can be for anyone who wants to answer.
I'm hoping that people will be itching to get out of their apartments and come take art classes. And hopefully, you know, we will work with people who've been hit economically to get them into classes as well. But I am hopeful that it will be a very good reunion with in-person contact.
But also that the things that we've started, like the virtual courses and the video courses, will be supplemental, and we'll be able to meld the two together in some sort of hybrid way, because, you know, it has expanded, even though it's a significant drop in income, it's expanded our audience and kind of our way of thinking about our reach. And I think that's hopefully will continue, like I said, in some sort of hybrid way.
I'm also looking forward to group classes again, and then private lessons. I used to teach a lot of private lessons with an range of ages, and so I look forward to being comfortable being in a closed space again, or even just outside, but doing those lessons again. And I agree. I think people are going to want to get outside and out of their houses, so it might be well for us.
I was pretty like shocked with our end of year review for 2020 on like how much programming we kind of continued doing. With Local Color, you know, in March, it was crazy. Like it was like 1 or 2 weeks before the official shutdown, when it was like, you can do events of 200 people, now 150 people, 50 people. And like in that time period, we had planned a seasonal vendors market at one of our spaces at Keystone. And, you know, it was just some people didn't show up for their tables. You know, we refunded all the fees and everything. And it was just a few people came out. And then after that, you know, we completely stopped. We closed all of our studios. We let all the artists and residents know that they, you know, you can come in to get your supplies, but you can't work in the space. And then everything in May, when like the protests happened, we just felt like we needed to go back to work and to continue programming, and in small groups. We did like an outdoor week of youth art classes. I've seen like the Arsenal doing outdoor youth art classes. So I think it's just going to be like an augmented way, and maybe like the scale of things just needs to be smaller. And my current role, Local Color, is managing the studios. So after a really long phone call with 211, but they were very helpful. You know, again, like I feel like most of my interactions with like San Jose, Santa Clara County city officials has always been really positive. So I'm really helpful for that. There's a lot of great folks working in these institutions that care. And so we're doing a mishmash of higher education, studio art labs, manufacturing, kind of office, remote, and we're just limiting it to a 25% capacity. So we're just trying to prioritize the collective health and safety of the folks that we work with and their families as best as possible, while also continuing whatever it is that we're trying to do. So I think it is just going to continue being that balance of just doing things on a smaller scale, outdoors, utilizing our outdoor spaces, which is like, you know, thank goodness we're in California and we have that desirable option. So.
I've got a quick question. It's not necessarily a sexy question, but I've tried to start several businesses, like small kind of ideas, but I always feel like I get stuck with when it comes to like contracts or like legal stuff. And I just get like nervous because I don't want to get shut down or then owe a bunch of money that I didn't even have to begin with. Just curious, because I think someone also mentioned LegalZoom at some point. Is that reliable? Do you need a lawyer to follow up? And then also, how important are contracts, and how do you know if you have a good one?
Can I start? So I used to write my own, and then I had a client who was buying a sculpture who was a lawyer. And he said, "I'm happy to sign this, but just so you know, this doesn't mean anything. I could tear this apart in 5 minutes in court, but I'll sign it. But I highly recommend that you learn how to write a real contract." And so from there, we started doing a lot of homework, and LegalZoom being one. You were going to say.
I was just going to say that we use LegalZoom because they are represented by lawyers. They have, I think they're free, but then you can, if you get their subscription thing, you can get free legal help. So they have, well, free, if you subscribe, it's free. You can have like on-demand legal help, and they have templates that are legally binding verbiage, you know, that you just plug in your business, and they have like every kind of thing you can imagine. We were looking for videographers, and like what kind of contracts we would sign with a videographer, who owns what, you know, that kind of thing. And they had one for that. And then, like I said, they don't file things. They don't file your tax stuff, but they do take care of the legal, like the legal whatever filings, if you want them to, as your registered agent.
Contract back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it is really important, though, to have somebody, like an actual person, because you might have questions like Yori had, like, what does intellectual property mean in terms of, you know, my preliminary work on this sculpture, and who owns that, and I want to keep that. And I mean, it can get pretty dense, and having those questions. But like, I think Carmen mentioned, the Center for Cultural Innovation has some really great classes, and they're ongoing. So you can take them pretty much like every month or something, right? And they have people that have this experience, so that you know what to look for and questions to ask, because that's half the battle, is just knowing where to even start and what questions to ask.
Does anybody know? I don't know if they still exist, or actually what they're called, unfortunately. But when I was a student at SFAI, every month there was a place where you go and get free legal advice for artists. Has anybody heard of that?
In San Francisco.
In San Francisco? Sorry, may not even be a thing anymore, but
If only.
There's an Instagram for it. I think it's called Taxes for Artists, and then tied to them, it's something like Legal Advice for Artists, and they're both nonprofits. Just like Google Taxes for Artists, and the Instagram should come up. But I also wanted to add, if you're ever presented a contract, talk to your other artist friends, or try to find, whether it's via LegalZoom or you happen to know a lawyer or a friend of a friend who's a lawyer, have them help you out in the best capacity you can and read the contract. Something I highly regret is not doing that with my book contract. And I learned the hard way what an advance means. So whether, you know, do your own bit of research as well before you sign something, and use all of these websites and all of these resources that there are before you sign your name to anything.
the last thing I would love to say about contracts is don't sign it until you understand every single sentence. And it's legalese that doesn't make sense. And the last one I went through, it took me a lot of research to figure out exactly what it actually meant. Because they use terms that in the legal world are something kind of different, for example. So don't put your name down until you've figured it all out. In fact, I had 3 colors of highlighters. One was yellow, I understood it, I would sign it. One was red, I understood it, I wouldn't sign it. And then green was, I don't know what the hell this thing is. And until they all turned yellow, I didn't put my name on
I found the Instagram of the person that I mentioned. It's Firm for the Culture. I just recently discovered them, but it seemed legit. And anytime that you're working with anyone in like a field that isn't art, but understands art or has some connections to it, I think it's just like helpful. And then they understand like this kind of starting place that you're in. With Local Color, we just recently made the investment to work with a lawyer and improve our contracts. And I feel much better about it whenever we're offering a statement of work to an artist, and making sure that they understand it and making sure that it has as minimal legalese as possible. But when you start going into indemnification and all these like liability coverages, you can't help but leave that kind of language in there. But that kind of like helps you field out opportunities too. If someone is trying to like push an NDA on you and like not even giving you the opportunity to read it, then like maybe this is like an opportunity you want to, step away from. Yeah. But they are important, I think, like on both ends, both as the signer and as the person handing the contract out.
Thank you. That was super helpful, everyone.
Thanks again, everyone, to being part of this. Yori, Dana, Carmen, Alyssa Ray, Jai, Kristen, Frederick, Constance, Stephanie, Rachel, everybody. Great job. And thank everyone for coming out and enjoying this. I hope this was really helpful for you. Be sure to connect with these some of the panelists when you can, and connect with each other. And I hope this is what you guys were hoping for with this workshop. So thanks again.